Hey everybody, and welcome back. So if you are new to my channel, I talk about all of my aviation experiences with model aircraft and how I've had success. And that's primarily my mission, is to only talk about what I have done and what's worked for me. I don't just try to put a channel together to tell you what I think would work, then you go out and find out it doesn't work. So let's get this boat out of the harbor. So if you don't know, I'm obsessed with giant scale aircraft, and I've been building giant scale aircraft, which to me is above 150 inches. They're electric, 6,000 watt is about the ballpark, 32-inch propellers, 10 pitch, blah, blah, blah. But my obsession has been to design my own aircraft and build them, and I've learned an awful lot over that 20 years of doing it. And I've also learned, how these aircraft fly and how they're affected by wind and all the different things in the world. But this video is going to be talking about the configuration of an aircraft, which means when the gear's up, when the flaps are up, if you have spoilers, all these different things, how the plane reacts in the air versus when it's dirty, when the flaps are down, the gear's down, maybe you've had a speed brake out in the air. Because before I got into giant scale airplanes, I was obsessed with basically 60 and 90 size airplanes, obsessed with IMAA legal airplanes, which were 80-inch spans and up, and I had quite a few ducted fans, and some of them were made, I believe, by Jet Hanger Hobby, and the other ones were made by Byron Originals. So before I get too far into this, though, I do want to give a shout out to one of my sponsors, RTL Fasteners. If you need bolts, nuts, servo screws, you need blind nuts, any of the fasteners that we use for model aircraft, they're going to probably have. So if you go to the website and you buy more than $50 of the bolts and nuts and all the things we need, and you use code DA30, you'll get 30% off your order. 30% off your order. Boy, I'm tripping all over my words this morning. So it's actually 4 a.m. I'm up, and before I started work, I wanted to try to pump this video out. So when we talk about configurations of aircraft, and the reason I'm doing this is I've done a couple of videos on flaps and retracts, and one of my followers reached out and said, hey, could you really tell me what's going on with this airplane they built? And actually they have everything except slats. They don't have the leading edge devices, okay? And they notice a massive difference, which you would in a full scale or a model, when you dump the flaps. Now they are going to 70 degrees of flaps, which I've done that on a couple of high wing kind of experimental trainers where I had my flaps go almost down to 90 degrees. Basically 70 degrees is about the farthest I've ever gone before they just become air brakes and they don't produce a lot of lift, okay? 60 degrees is still a deep, flap. 40 and 45 degrees is pretty much typical normal. I did fly a long time ago a Cessna 175 straight tail, I think it was, and it had 60 degree flaps on it and like a stall feature, and I thought it was really, really cool aircraft. And that was full scale. That's when I used to fly full scale a lot. But when you build an airplane, I'm going to use this as an example because a long time ago, I think it was Jet Hanger Hobbies that made a 40 size ducted fan version of this, and I had an OS 46 in it, I think, on a tune pipe, and it actually had leading edge devices. It had spoilers that would come up off the top of the wings, flaps, ailerons, everything else. Even had a speed brake. Now the speed brake I did not have working on mine, okay? But if you did have a speed brake, you need to think about what's going on the moment you dump anything out into the airstream, okay? As you drive down the road in a car and you stick your hand out the window and you feel the force of that, look at your speedometer, because just at 40 miles an hour, you're going to feel a lot of force. And I always try to explain to people, most of our models fly basically 40 to 110, 115 mile an hour, depending on, your mileage will differ, but I just did a video about doing a cross country with a trainer, and the trainer was easily going 55 and 60 mile an hour most of the time. But there's a certain thing about flying different models that you learn that you don't necessarily think of. Now, when I flew this on my ducted fan with a pipe, when I moved the throttle up, it maybe took a second and a half for that engine really to get up and going. So there was a little bit of a lag time. Totally noticed it. Like at the time I was flying an extra 260 and with a Husqvarna engine in it, and it absolutely was instant power at that big prop. The ducted fan had just a little bit of a lag time as it came up. I mean, nothing like a real turbine. Okay, and I've not flown, well, I've flown turbines, but I've not owned a turbine. But I guess what I'm trying to babble about right now is you need to understand, like I've talked about in my landing videos, I always tell you to get completely configured for landing in the downwind. That way, as you're turning downwind to base, you're concentrating only on flying the airplane. And then the dreaded base to final, where, and I've told you, and I'm going to keep saying this, the teeter-totter. If you're pulling back on your stick, you're adding throttle. Okay, when you're in a turn and you're pulling back, you're actually increasing the angle of attack. And if you're not adding power, you're burning off airspeed, and that's the reason so many people crash from base to final. Half of them blame it on the radio. They're like, I had no control. Well, in a stall, you don't have control of your airplane. Okay? So when you start thinking of, in this illustration here, I'm dumping the flaps and leading edge device, which is going to, first of all, the brake is going to change something to do with the pitch of the airplane. It's either going to pitch down or pitch up a little bit. So you're going to be trimming. And if you know, when I've talked about flying a model airplane, you should be trimming versus all the time. When your airspeed changes, when I fly full scale or flew full scale, I haven't been commanded in 20 years. But anytime I would change my airspeed, I would reach down and turn the wheel a little bit to control my trim, my pitch of my airplane. On model aircraft, a lot of people don't want to trim. They just want to kind of put that stick where it needs to go. And then we get complacent because you want that stick to feel like, oh, it should be in the middle. And, if you're pushing down, let's say, I'm going to say a phenomenon that happened to me once, and I crashed the plane. And this was many, many years ago. Totally my fault. A couple of spectators watching said, oh my gosh, did your radio quit? And I'm like, no, I stalled the plane. So imagine, if you will, you're flying a plane that is really clean when the gear and flaps are up, and it's just like on rails. It just moves along almost like a pattern airplane. You can put it wherever you want it. And you drop the landing gear, and the plane pitches down a little bit, just a little bit. So now you're pulling back on the stick a little bit. Okay, you're not, if you don't trim, you've got to be pulling that stick back a little bit. And when you pull that stick back a little bit, you're losing airspeed, and you got your gear down, which are air brakes. So now you're starting to get the plane going in the wrong direction. Okay, you don't want your airspeed always dropping. So I did add a couple of clicks of power because I could just feel the airplane had slowed down. But then when I got to full flaps, the plane was ballooning up so much that I was really pushing forward stick. So now I'm doing the opposite. Instead of pulling back a little bit, now I'm pushing the nose down. So I'm turning downwind to base with the airplane, and I've got quite a bit of forward stick. But now I'm like, oh gosh, I'm still too high. I got to get the power back. Now I'm pulling back on the power. Okay. Now I'm turning base to final, and I'm starting to pull back, and I feel my thumb is neutral right in the middle where it's always used to being. And I'm like, okay, that's my sweet spot. And I've got my power back, and right as I started to overshoot the runway a little bit, I pulled a little bit of up elevator, just a little bit, like you normally would. And all of a sudden, the plane just rolled on its back. I went to full throttle and basically pile drived it right in the ground because I knew I stalled it. but I wasn't able to recover it. It just happened so fast. Instinctively, the moment it started to roll, I went to full power. I did the wrong thing by adding reverse aileron. The moment your wings are stalling, aileron is the death of your stall. You're not going to recover at all if you've got a lot of aileron in. So I crashed this airplane, and I think I knew immediately what I'd done wrong, and I was really, really hard on myself. I was really mad. But when we fly these model aircraft where we're not in the cockpit, unless you have telemetry, you don't know your airspeed, and a lot of telemetry is just a nuisance because it's always screaming in your ear. Because I've got telemetry on 3 of my airplanes, and I use it just for altitude now, just so I know how high I'm flying. I pretty much turn the airspeed and all that stuff off because it's just a nuisance. Because keep in mind, you can stall an airplane at any speed. You can pull an accelerated stall pretty easy. And I don't know how many times people want to argue, well, you can't stall an airplane if you're going fast down. Take any model aircraft up 3 or 4 mistakes high, put it in about a 60-degree bank, and start adding power until you're almost at full power doing this perfect turn, and then start pulling that tighter and tighter and tighter, and you're going to see that airplane stall. You're going to be at full power, and you're going to see that plane stall, and that's an accelerated stall. If you want to come out of a dive kind of quick, and be careful that make sure this is an airplane you're going to structurally damage, and you want to pull up elevator as quick as you can, you will see that plane a lot of times just roll on its back. That's an accelerated stall. So when you get an airplane in this configuration now on my illustration here, where it's dirty, you should flown the plane enough that you have mixed trims in. So when you dump that flap, it's automatically trimming the airplane for that configuration. If you have the gear down and it changes the pitch of the airplane, put in a couple of clicks of mix to that elevator, that you know that, okay, my plane is still pretty much where I want to stick. Okay, now I don't necessarily ever fly with my stick completely in the neutral point because I'm always diving or climbing or doing something. So yes, if you're doing any kind of figure eights or you're doing Immelmans or anything, your stick will never be in the middle. But I'm talking about if you're trying to fly scale and you're trying to fly realistically, the trims are going to really be very important to you. And the configure of the aircraft it's paramount to what's happening. So one thing that I don't know if you noticed here is these configurations I just showed you is a preparation to land. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the clean configuration, and I'm going to say, okay, imagine you are coming right down show center above your head, and you drop the air brake because you were just screaming out of a dive. So now you're slowing down. You're going to dump in 1 notch of flaps. You're still slowing down. The plane's trimmed and mixed right. It's not pitching around. Now you're going to drop the gear. Plane slowing down. You're adding the power. You're doing everything right. And then you're going to go to full flaps. Now the plane's configured to land. You got to suck up that air brake or you're going to scrape it on the ground when you land. And now you're ready to land. So all of that sounds really super easy. Unless it's your 3rd flight on it, you have the crap scared out of you that you're going to crash this airplane that you've spent a lot of time on. Keep in mind, and I've said this before, once you've flown a plane 100 times, it's kind of like your vision is 180 degrees. You see everything, you feel everything, you're one with the airplane. But in those first couple of 2 or 3 flights, you're like laser focused right at that airplane, and you're not yourself. You're not comfortable yet. Okay? So one last thing I do want to show you is I had a friend that put so many servos in a B-17 and had so many switches, he couldn't remember what switch did what. And I remember him saying, will you help me test fly this airplane out on my farm? And this was about 10 years ago, I think, or maybe even 15 years ago. And I can't even remember whose plans these were. I mean, this was about 100 and, it might have been Don Smith or one of those. I'm not sure who made this. It's like 160 inches, 180 inches, I think. And he had a whole bunch of 4-stroke 120s in it or 90s. But I went out to his farm, And he was showing me how everything worked on it, and I thought it was slicker than snot. I thought it was really cool. But he couldn't remember which switches were what. And I said, dude, we've got to take, and you have to know which switches is doing what, or you're going to end up flipping the wrong switch. And because, you know, on the B-17, when you think about the B-17, in this first picture here, you see that the landing gear door is open here. I don't know if the landing gear door is going to affect the pitch or not on the B-17, but I damn well want to make sure I know how to close it. Especially if I'm going to land it, I'm probably going to drag it on the ground a little bit. Or if I have a hard landing and I compress those oleos, I'm probably going to hit that gear. Now, this 3D model here is a DAS model I downloaded, and I didn't design this, so there's a lot of problems with it. The cowlings are all wrong. It's actually a very poor recreation of a B-17, but the ball turret on his would go up and down like the real one. If you don't know, the real B-17 kept the turret tucked up into the fuselage for takeoff and landing. Once it was airborne, it would come back down out a little bit so that the gunner could see what he's doing. Well, his ball turret would come up and down, and when it was on the ground, his ball turret would almost touch the ground. I mean, literally be like a millimeter off the pavement. And I told him, I said, well, we want to make sure we don't land with the ball turret down. He's like, yeah, it's this switch. And I'm not kidding you. He couldn't remember where any of this was on his switches. The front, it's hard to see here, but the front nose turret moved on his plane. And right now it's moving on this plane. And, you know, we cycled the flaps. We cycled all this different stuff on his airplane. We had sawhorses and had it up on there with the gear. And the thing is that I told him we are only going to do a test flight to make sure the plane flies. We're not going to do any bomb bay doors opening, lowering any turrets. We're not going to do anything. And this was before you could build like a randomizer. A friend of mine, Berger, builds them, and it'll randomly make things move, like turrets, pilots' heads, you know, whatever. So I said, we're just going to fly this airplane. And if you followed my channel and just watched my video on flying twins, you know I love twins to be electric. If they're gas, they're okay. Glow makes me nervous. Four-stroke doesn't make me that nervous. But on a four-engine airplane, you still have that belief that if I lose one engine, I'm going to be able to fly fine. And you're probably right if you're up cruising around. Most four-engine model aircraft I've flown, if I lose an engine during the flight, which for some reason is almost every flight because of harmonics of vibration or bubbles in the fuel tanks, you seem to hardly ever land with all four engines landing. Now, I know your mileage will different here because on gas engines, they stay running a lot better, okay? And what I mean by gas is your two-stroke weed eater engines. But this B-17, I texted it around, all the four strokes were running, and actually, it wasn't until our 6th or 7th flight that we actually lost an engine in flight. So these four strokes, I'm trying to remember if they were Surpass. I think that used to be a maker of a four-stroke. I can't remember. God, this might have been 20 years ago. But I don't think they were Surpass. It's irrelevant, but they were 90 or 120s. So I take the plane off. I get it up, I don't know, 150 feet in the air, suck the gear up, make sure the gear goes up clean. We flew it around. I did a couple of low passes with it, got it back up 150 feet, dropped the gear. The gear came down, which was pretty good. And I was like, okay, we're going to put the flaps down. And I was probably going pretty fast. And I dropped the flaps, and the plane started to roll. I immediately flipped the flaps back up, and I said, the plane started to roll on me. He goes, what do you mean? So then I slowed the plane down a lot, dropped the flaps, and I was fine. I said, what size servos you got on those flaps? He goes, I thought they're big enough. I said, how many servos? Those were huge flaps. He goes, there's one servo per flap, but they're pretty high torque servos. And I'm like, I think we need to check that when we land. Then I went to full flaps, and the plane started to roll again. And I was going pretty slow, so we couldn't get the full flaps. Those flaps were big enough that they were stalling the servo. So I landed, keep in mind, and I've said this in my flap video, you don't need flaps to fly a model airplane. In real life, the reason we have flaps is to help get the nose down so we can see the runway, okay? So I left that one notch of flaps. We landed the airplane, and it was fine. It was great. So I held the flaps up and said, drop your flaps, and I could literally with my fingertips hold his flaps up. Mechanically speaking, he had these really big long arms to try to get a bunch of this flap movement. He had the linkage basically backwards on his flaps, and we figured that all out over the next couple of weeks and fixed it. We decided to keep flying the plane that day. We ended up, I think, having 8 flights on the plane, and I had 6 or 7 and he had 2. One of the things about this airplane, though, that we didn't realize on this day was how much the flaps would cause it to pitch. So we got really, really used to flying this airplane without any flaps. We didn't even use any flaps to take off or land the rest of the day because we knew the servos could stall. Fast forward 3 weeks later, he's got these big old honking high-tech servos in the airplane. I take off, fly it around, I don't know, 15 minutes. I mean, he had huge fuel tanks in this. I don't think it was 15, it might have been 10. And I dump a notch of flaps, great, dump full flaps, and man, did this plane pitch up. And man, did it slow down. And I'm sitting there pushing the nose down, adding power, and I'm like, whoa, this thing really pitches up with these flaps. And we landed, and it was amazing that we probably had 4 degrees of down elevator mixed in to the full flaps. Okay, so he then flies the airplane. As he's flying the airplane, he's playing with switches and stuff. And I say to him, I said, do you even know where you're going? And he goes, yeah, I am. And he wanted to move the turrets and all this stuff. He had probably flown 300 yards away. Me, I like to stay close to the field. And as he started to turn the plane back around, he just says, here, take the radio. And he handed me the radio. And I'm like, what's going on? He goes, it's not flying right. And the first thing I always do is I go to full power slowly and I put the nose down. And as I'm coming around, the plane actually looks like it's skidding. It's slipping. I said, you've lost an engine. And I pull the power back to half, get the nose down. And I did a mistake. I actually did a flyby to confirm I had a bad engine, which was dumb. I should have just landed. So we went over, and the number 2 engine, the prop wasn't spinning. So I eased in a little bit of power and eased in a little bit of rudder and came back around. Didn't use any flaps, and we landed the plane fine. And but nowadays, the moment the plane would fly wonky, I would be landing the airplane. I would not try to do a flyby to see which engine was bad, especially on a glow type engine. I'm just going to land it. And on electric, you hardly ever lose an engine. But the long story of this is that I had never flown an airplane that pitched so violently with the flaps down as this B-17 did. Now, one of my friends told me it's because the props blast straight onto these flaps on the B-17. All 4 engines are blowing air on those flaps. So as you add power and take off power, you notice a big pitch change because of the blast. If you do a go around at full power with this B-17, it would pitch way up. So, and it's hard to mix just the throttle into an elevator mix. You don't want to do that. We thought it was just the gear and the flaps coming down. It was actually, anytime I added power on the plane, it was pitching it too. So the long story short is, know what your freaking switches do. Don't sit there and look at your switches while you're flying a 160 or 180 inch bomber away from you. It's how much workload you as a pilot can handle safely with that airplane. Okay? I love all the doodads and switches and dropping bombs. Though I saw a guy crash a Mitchell one time, a B-25. He watched his bombs fall out of his airplane and he stalled it. So he's flying by. This was a Royal kit, I think. Bombs away. He's watching the bombs and somebody goes, hey, your plane. And he pulls up full elevator, basically snap rolled the airplane in a panic and could not recover. He didn't even go to full throttle because I watched this happen. And right as the plane hit the ground, he's going to full throttle. So if you're going to drop bombs, get somebody to videotape it or have somebody fly your airplane and drop the bombs and you watch your bombs drop. Okay? So these configurations are very important if you're wanting to get into scale airplanes or more complex plane. If you're just flying a part flyer or a 3D plane or a pattern plane, this doesn't matter that much. Okay? So I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, I got to worry about my configuration. I only try I want you all to be curious and don't judge the problem. Okay, actually I stole that from Ted Lasso. It's a great line. Be curious but don't judge. If you see an airplane do something weird, don't just judge it's a piece of crap airplane. Be curious and figure out why it did that. Okay, so look, this video went way too long. Sorry for being so chatty, everybody. And I've gotten probably 15 or 20 requests on doing videos just like this about, you know, one of the future videos I'm getting ready to do is how would you get a kid that's 3 to 6 years old into model aviation, flying RC. I've done some research on that, talked to some people. I've got a little bit of experience. I try to not do videos where I don't have some experience in it, and I think that's going to be a really exciting video. I have, of course, a video I'm going to do on my Patreon. Everybody keeps saying, would you please do a video about all your designs and everything that's available on your Patreon? One reason I don't want to do it, I don't want to feel like I'm pimping my Patreon. Okay, the long story short is I used to give away all my designs free, and somebody started stealing them and putting them on the internet and trying to charge money for people, and I had to figure out how to shut that down. So for like $5 or $6, you can join my Patreon and download all my designs. 3D designs, my STLs, my CAD drawings, everything I've ever done is on my Patreon. So yeah, that's it, everybody. You know, I always end a video talking about kids. I want you to do your best to get kids interested in RC and be that good person. Actually, I had somebody tell me they quit following me on my Facebook because I'm too much of a goody-goody. You know, I'm too positive. I'm too nice. I'm too happy. Guilty. You know, I just want to make aviation a better place to fly. You know, if you're one of those grumpy old people at the field that hate FPV, you hate quads, you hate drones, you hate helicopters, you hate kids showing up with a drone, you're part of the problem, and you're probably this person that says that they don't like me being a goody person or whatever the hell they called me. Yeah, get kids involved in model aviation, folks. You know, we don't need them at home playing a video game where they can go into a mall and massacre people, or they can go into a city square and take a car and run over all their bodies. We want kids to get away from the video games, unless it's an air simulator, you know, like Real Flight Simulator. That's okay for a video game. But we got to keep kids involved in model aviation. There's physics, there's science. You learn to deal with people who say that you're too nice and too good to people. There's all kinds of things we learn from model aviation. So rock on, everybody. I'll see you next time. Please like and subscribe my videos. I'm really trying to build my YouTube to get the message out to everybody that I do this. And have a fabulous day and an awesome morning. Take care. Bye.